Hi everyone! How are you Scooby-Doo be doing? This is the 7th episode of my podcast. We'll be discussing the 7th episode of the What's New Scooby-Doo series, which is Roller Coaster Ride. This is Season 1, Episode 7. I love this episode mainly because of Scooby and Shaggy's ride that they designed at the end. It looks so delicious. I'll be talking about this episode and other things I noticed about the Scooby-Doo series that hopefully you will find interesting as well. You should give this episode a watch if you haven't already, and if you have, you can always rewatch it. I haven't had any questions this week, but I just wanted to mention how much I love hearing about what people think of the episodes and sharing their experiences of Scooby-Doo. I love how much of a community there is for Scooby-Doo and how wholesome the fan base is and how lucky I am to be a part of it. Please come join me on my Instagram @meddlingpodcast if you want to enjoy Scooby-Doo posts, polls, and just Scooby-Doo conversations in general. The people I have already been speaking to on Instagram who have told me what they thought of my podcast or that they listened to it, I just want to say thank you, because I'm sure, like other podcasters, you have days where you wonder if anyone actually likes this, and it really makes my day being able to hear that there's someone out there listening and, more importantly, enjoying listening to these episodes, especially as Scooby-Doo is something near and dear to my heart. Anyway, enough sappiness, I'll get back to this episode. Again, just a quick note that the opening scene happened at the beginning of the episode again on my DVD. I'm just documenting it for my own curiosity, and I'm sure no one is that bothered, but I just think it's weird and I wonder if it will change its order again or not. Anyway, once the opening theme has finished, we get the opening scene, which shows us some kids on the parasail ride. One of the boys at the front of the ride seems to be scared and wants to get off, but his friend tells him not to be such a baby. We see the ride going ahead as normal, but then a green monster on a jet ski sabotages it by using its sharp claws to cut the rope connecting the parasail ride to the boat. The kids on the ride all scream, and we see the ride flying around as the green monster rides away laughing. It fades to black. After the opening scene, we see Shaggy and Scooby playing a roller coaster game on a handheld game console. What's quite funny is that while they're playing it, they are moving as if they are actually on the roller coaster. I like this. I think as kids, a lot of us probably did things like this. I know when I played Mario Kart, I used to move with the wheel instead of just sitting still. I think it's good as an extra visual for children to enjoy and laugh at. Daphne, however, doesn't think that it's funny and takes the handheld games console away from them and tells them to cut it out. Fred reminds her that without the game, Shaggy wouldn't have been able to win them all the tickets for thrill rides. This is quite interesting that Shaggy has managed to win tickets for thrill rides, especially after the last episode where he won a radio contest for tickets to Lindsay Pagano's headlining debut in Las Vegas. I like that we see little extra bits about the gang. We see that Shaggy and Scooby like playing video games and also like roller coasters. The handheld games console, which looks like a mashup of the handheld game consoles we had out there at the time, is a use of more modern technology in What's New Scooby-Doo. I like that Shaggy was playing the game in the van because I used to play my DS in the car all the time, so that made me feel quite nostalgic. Also, we see a bit later on the use of more modern technology in the roller coasters that have been built at thrill rides. Velma sarcastically replies to Fred that no free tickets to the coaster rides. Now, there's a big loss. Velma clearly isn't that bothered by the rides, which is a shame because I would have thought maybe the technology behind it and how they were made, that it would be right up Velma's street. Fred comments that he guesses the thrill of riding roller coasters is a guy thing. This isn't true, obviously. Just because Velma doesn't like it, that doesn't mean that no girls will. Girls can like things boys like and vice versa. Shaggy mentions that he's excited to get to meet Chris and Terry in person. They're the people who designed the park. Fred comments that they must be a couple of guys who know how to make a scary ride. Let's see, shall we? They arrive at the thrill ride park. The camera moves around so we can see all of the thrill ride park. It's really impressive. There's so many rides there and they all look different and fun. The gang are greeted at the front entrance of the park by the ticket office by two women who welcome them. One of the women seems more enthusiastic than the other and congratulates them for winning the Design Your Own Roller Coaster contest. This sounds really cool, and I bet you can't wait to find out what type of roller coaster Scooby and Shaggy designed. I wonder if you can guess what they designed. If you've seen it before and already know, what type of roller coaster would you design? If you want, you can message me and I'll read it out at the beginning of the next episode. Shaggy asks the two women when they get to meet Chris and Terry. He also says those two guys are his heroes. One of the women introduces herself as Chris and tells them that the enthusiastic one is her sister Terry. Shaggy and Scooby seem confused that they're not guys, and Fred even says, "But you design roller coasters," just as equally confused. Daphne and Velma seem a lot more interested now, even say that it's so cool. I like that it shows us that Chris and Terry are women and that they designed the whole of thrill rides. I know when I was younger I loved being able to see women doing things that people thought were for boys. I think it's important to encourage children that they can do whatever job they want to that interests them, regardless of if they are a boy or a girl. The gang follow Chris and Terry, who seem to be leading them towards the food court. They mentioned the VIP passes they get will allow them to go on every ride in the park. Terry mentions the food court and Shaggy instantly asks if it's free food. Terry smiles and tells them to help themselves. Those are famous last words of Shaggy and Scooby, especially because they don't look like they could eat you out of house and home. Terry and Chris take Scooby and Shaggy to see their ride and how far they've gotten with it so far. They leave Fred, Daphne and Velma behind and tell them they'll catch up with them later. We see Terry and Chris walk out of the food court with Scooby and Shaggy behind them with a huge tower of food. Terry asks Shaggy how he came up with the idea for a combination roller coaster and, wait for it, an all-you-can-eat buffet. I'm not sure what you guessed or even expected, but of course it was a food-related design. This is probably one of my favourite parts. They named the ride All You Can Hurl, which is quite a funny yet little gross name for a ride. Terry tells them that it's just as cool as something her sister would design. Her sister Chris doesn't seem that pleased with her saying that. Terry explains that her sister Chris comes up with the rides and designs, and that Terry figures out how to build them, make them safe, and actually publicise them. Terry explains to them that their roller coaster will start off with a buffet line at the entrance to the ride, and that the tracks then start there. She mentions the pizza pie peak, which sounds yummy, and then the deviled egg drop. Fred, Velma and Daphne head to the Sky High ride where they wait for Shaggy and Scooby. We see a young boy complaining that he is not tall enough for the ride and storms off. Velma notices that the park isn't very busy for the most happening coaster park in the country, but Fred points out that at least they don't have to wait in long lines for rides. They get into the Sky High tank in jumpsuits, and Daphne asks what happens now. Fred gives a thumbs up to the guy at the controls and tells her, "You'll see." So the Sky High ride is just like a skydiving machine. The gang seem to be enjoying themselves and moving about together having fun. Unfortunately, that's short-lived because the green monster that we saw from the opening scene arrives. The green monster is referred to as the roller ghoster in this episode, so that's what I'll be calling it from now on. The roller ghoster jumps at the guy at the controls, who runs away. The roller ghoster ends up landing on the controls and destroying the controls of the Sky High ride with its claws. The floor at the bottom of the skydiving machine opens to reveal the fan, which is slowing down, causing Fred, Velma and Daphne to fall downwards. They start to fear they're going to fall to their doom when Daphne uses her belt to jam the fan. They still fall, but nowhere near as risky as it could have been. A man opens the side of the machine to where the gang are and asks if they're all okay. They explain that the ride's broken, and he replies, "I can't believe it's happened again." The man, who is actually the safety officer and called Sam, closes the ride. He mentions that this has happened before, and that at first it was the parasail. This was the ride that we saw in the opening scene. Then it was the cliff diving simulator. This must have happened behind the scenes. Sam tells the gang about the roller coaster. Velma ends up finding green fur on the controls that have been slashed. Sam tells them that he's never cared for these newfangled extreme rides. He explains that they're too dangerous and high-tech, and that the classic rides were better. This does make him a little suspicious, even though he seems like a nice guy. He tells them that he's never seen the roller coaster and that he doesn't like the new rides, which might be a motive to destroy them. Fred decides they have a mystery to solve and splits them up. Fred tells Velma to go see if Terry and Chris know anything about the roller coaster, and Daphne decides that her and Fred are going to take a closer look at the rides before dragging him away. As they all leave, Sam says that strange things have been happening and that the next ride could be their last if they're not careful. This sounds very ominous, and it doesn't make him look very good, especially as a potential suspect. We see Shaggy and Scooby, who mention that Chris and Terry have disappeared again and decide to go on some rides until they appear again. Scooby and Shaggy see a cool slingshot ride, and before they ride, we see the same young boy complaining about being too short for the ride. This seems to be a recurring theme. What I found quite funny about this scene is that normally both Scooby and Shaggy are scaredy cats, but Shaggy isn't scared of going on the ride, whereas Scooby is terrified to the point his teeth are chattering, even when Shaggy drags him into the ride, telling him there's no need to be scared. Once the ride is started, we see the roller coaster on the side of the building, and it cuts one of the ropes holding the ball for the slingshot. The rope snaps, which leaves Shaggy and Scooby and the ball bouncing around the park until they end up on a roller coaster following the track along in front of the actual carts. We see Velma walk into the Thrill Rides Park main office and into Terry's office. Velma knocks on the door, but it opens. She asks if anyone's there and then walks in anyway. She ends up seeing a hairbrush on the desk and notices green fibres in it. Before she can do anything though, Terry walks in. Velma explains about the skydiving ride and what happened with the roller coaster. Terry instantly says the roller coaster, which Velma questions that she knows about it, but before she can get any answers, Chris walks in and is trying to close the door to stop Harry Harrison, a reporter for thisridestinks.com. During the altercation, Velma puts the brush back on the desk. Harry ends up getting in and hitting Chris with the door in the process, which you can see because she's rubbing her nose after getting hit. Harry goes on a rant about how the park is haunted. Chris mentions how do we know it's not him trying to get better ratings for his website by uncovering a haunted park. Before we can get into that, our attention is turned back onto Scooby and Shaggy in the giant hamster ball from the slingshot ride, trying to escape falling down from a cliff into water. Shaggy manages to save them by bribing Scooby with 2 Scooby snacks. They end up breaking the giant ball and Fred and Daphne find them. They ask what happened and Shaggy mentions the monster. Daphne mentions they've been on almost every ride in the park and still not seen the monster. Daphne then gets distracted by the sight of the fastest roller coaster in the world, the rocket coaster. Shaggy comments that he guesses that the thrill of riding roller coasters is a girl thing now. Before Fred, Daphne and Shaggy and Scooby go on the ride, we see the young boy again complaining to the same guy about being too short for the ride. As they get into the rocket coaster, Velma runs up to them to warn them that she thinks the rides might have been tampered with. However, Fred says that that's what they're counting on to catch the ghost. They all end up in the rocket and we see the roller coaster tampering with the roller coaster. The rocket ends up in the water with the gang in it. They are luckily all okay and swim back to safety. Terry and Chris run over to them. Terry checks to see if the gang are all okay, but Chris seems more upset that her rocket coaster is ruined. Harry shows up to make another update for his website. Velma finds a wrench by the rocket coaster, and we find out it belongs to Chris. This seems suspicious, but why would Chris want to sabotage her own ride? She seems upset that it was ruined, but the clues seem to be pointing to her. We have quite a few potential suspects now. Could it be Harry to get more traffic on his website? Sam to relive the old glory days and bring out the safer classic rides? The young boy Eddie who's too short to go on any of the rides? Terry because the brush we found was in the main office? Or Chris who, with the wrench, now seems to have the clues pointing towards her? The gang end up in the main office with Terry, Chris and Harry. Velma explains that the green fur she found is artificial fur, which is proof the monster is actually just someone in a costume. Velma says she needs one more thing to prove her theory and asks Chris where the broken rides are stored. The gang go to the storage facility for the broken rides. They find Sam looking at the old rides and he mentions how the kids used to love playing on the ride and how much safer it was. Fred then decides Sam is the one who is sabotaging the rides and accuses him before Velma tells him it's not him. Velma explains that the rides weren't really sabotaged and that instead were gimmicked to look like they were sabotaged. Sam agrees and tells the gang that when he tried to fix the broken rides, they were in fact completely safe. Velma knows who the culprit is, but now needs the roller coaster to be caught. Fred has a plan, but he needs bait for it. Shaggy looks confused as to why everyone is looking at them. We see Shaggy and Scooby walking around in the park, and Shaggy wonders aloud if there's anything they wouldn't do for a Scooby snack. They walk to the payphone while Shaggy loudly says to Scooby, making sure every one of the suspects can hear him, that now they know who the roller coaster is, all that's left to do is call the police. The roller coaster appears behind the payphones and chases after them. The gang are waiting with nets but miss the monster and end up getting each other. The roller coaster chases them through the skate park, which looks like quite a cool chase scene to be fair. Just wanted to add that when the roller coaster and Scooby and Shaggy are skating around, they are all wearing helmets and safety gear, which I like. It's nice that it seems so normal and obvious that they would be wearing safety gear, especially when young impressionable children are watching the show, and I think that's important. The roller coaster ends up falling into a circus tent and surrounded by cuddly toys. The gang surround the roller coaster and it's time for the big reveal. Are you ready? Do you know who it is? Well, we're about to find out if you're right, because Fred removes the mask to show us that the roller coaster is in fact Terry. Everyone seems surprised. It's Terry and not Chris, except for Velma. Chris asks why Terry, her own sister, would want to frame her. Velma thinks it's because she's jealous. Terry explains that she did all the work to make Chris's crazy designs become a reality and that she never got to build any of her own. And she didn't even get any credit or even a thank you. Terry tells Chris she was easy to frame, but Velma replies that it was too easy and that the wrench as a clue was far too obvious. Daphne also mentions the green hair, green fur thing was too easy. Velma also mentions that once Sam told them that the rides weren't really broken, she knew it had to be Terry, making sure that no one really got hurt. Daphne mentions that once Chris was blamed, Terry would then get control of the park and build whatever she wanted. Terry says she would have gotten away with it if it weren't for you meddling kids. But Velma tells her that technically she did get away with it, and Fred agrees, saying she didn't do anything illegal. I would have to disagree with that, because even if the rides weren't really broken, what would have happened in the skydiving ride if Daphne hadn't used her belt to jam the fan? At the least I would say it was endangering lives, and at the most I would say attempted murder. Especially when Scooby and Shaggy were launched off the slingshot ride and ended up being bounced all around and almost fell off the cliff. They could have been injured, and the same with the rocket coaster which launched them into the water. What would have happened if it wasn't water they landed in, or if the doors wouldn't have opened and they sunk to the bottom? I've said for the people who have done reckless and dangerous things in these previous episodes that I'm glad they have been held accountable for their actions. Unfortunately, this time I'm going to have to disagree and say I think she should have been arrested for endangering people's lives, especially some of these young children who went on the parasailing ride, who put their trust in the thrill ride park owners. The worst thing that happens to Terry is that Chris tells her she's going to tell their mum. Eddie asks Velma how come he wasn't a suspect, and she explains that he's too short to wear the costume, which is quite funny given the running joke this episode about how he's too short for all the rides he wants to go on. Shaggy comes to the rescue to tell Eddie that he's not too short for the ride he designed. Eddie seems really happy and thanks Shaggy while they're on the ride. I just thought it was a really sweet and short moment that I really liked. Scooby, Shaggy and Eddie all ride the all-you-can-hurl ride. This ride is food-themed, and it looks like the roller coaster is missing a part, but it was designed that way as the cart has a parachute attached that lands them in a giant hot fudge sundae and then supplies them with spoons to eat their way out. Scooby bursts out of the ice cream and licks his lips before saying Scooby-Dooby-Doo. Okay, so this was the 7th episode of What's New Scooby-Doo. My best bit was the fact that Chris and Terry were women who designed and built roller coasters. I like the bit of girl power there was, and also that it gave young girls some role models. Also that we see Daphne, after going on one ride, decide that she really enjoys them and then drags Fred on all these rides. Also, the ride that Shaggy designed for the contest was so cool. I mean, I doubt it would be made in the real world, but I love the idea of having a ride to do with food and that you can eat during it as well. The worst bit was when Fred basically said that roller coasters were for guys, and then when they just assumed that Chris and Terry were guys. Also, I didn't like that there were no consequences for Terry even after all the sabotages to the rides, and the risk people could have been in. That was another worst bit. The funniest bit was Eddie, the young boy, constantly being refused on the rides because he was too short, but I do like in the end he finds a ride he can go on. My favourite supporting character for this episode was actually really hard, because I felt like he didn't really get to see enough of each character like you do in other episodes to form much of an opinion on them. I would have to pick Sam as my favourite supporting character, or just the character I liked the most, because he seemed genuinely nice and checked to see if the gang were alright after the altercation with the roller coaster and the skydiving ride. Also, he seems to have a genuine love of the old classic rides, and I think that just shows how much he used to love his job and how sad he is now at the change in technology and the rides being more elaborate and due to that more dangerous. I think he also cares about the children who used to ride the old classic rides and like to see them enjoying themselves. Overall, I like him as a supporting character. It made sense he was there, and he seemed like a kind man. This is the end of my 7th podcast episode. Thank you for listening. I wonder if you thought the same as my best, worst and funniest bits. Was Sam your favourite supporting character this episode? Whether you agreed or disagreed, I'd love to know your thoughts about this episode, and I may even feature them in my next episode. The next episode will be Season 1, Episode 8, So Far So Goody. So get ready to listen to the next podcast. Just to let everyone know that there is a link in any of the episode descriptions to the transcript for that particular episode, or you can just go to my website and go to the blog page and pick the episode you want. If you want to ask any questions or even just mention anything you liked about this episode, you can go to my website, meddlingpodcast.com, that's meddlingpodcast.com, or you can email me at feedback@meddlingpodcast.com. I'd love to hear any of your thoughts about Scooby-Doo, whether it's this episode, another episode, or Scooby-Doo in general. Thanks for listening and stay groovy!